can find me.
Wow.
I think ours was a long and two shorts, if I remember right.
I don't know.
Well, what's this about the radio crystal set? You built a radio, a crystal radio?
We used it, telephone receiver, and we wrapped our coils around anything that was, we used oatmeal boxes or tubings or anything to wrap our coils around. And I don't remember then whether we used a primary and a secondary or not. I think that come later.
Mm-hmm.
But the crystals was a piece of galena ore. And you know, these crystals had flat surfaces on them. Then we had what we called a cat whisker.
Uh-huh.
You heard that?
Uh-huh.
And we'd hunt around on that piece of crystal until we found a sensitive spot. And I listened to the first signal outside the binding I heard on my crystal set. The first radio signal, it was in code.
Oh, you heard code.
And then later, vacuum tubes come out, and I advanced to vacuum tubes.
So the crystal would pick up radio frequency and turn it into vibration.
Yes.
And then the whisker vibration was amplified to your headset. No, it wasn't amplified?
No.
You just had to listen real careful?
No amplifier. That's why I say I didn't know whether there's the primary and secondary. But I used to wind all my transformers.
I remember that.
I've got one down there now that goes from 110 to 1500.
Really?
That you wound yourself.
I wound it myself.
So, then you and your friend that had did each of you have a Ford coil and a crystal set? And you communicate back and forth?
Yeah, that's what we used in the Ford Sport coil.
Now, you got that of an old car?
Out of an old. We didn't care whether it was old or not. We got,
Were you stealing these coils? How did you get them?
no. The points on sometimes would go bad or something, and or they discarded their cars and we'd get coils out of them.
So these coils would generate radio frequency static.
Static. That's,
Yes.
I think that's more like what it was, static.
And they used to then use Morse code?
We used the Morse code.
Uh-huh.
So is that where you learned to code then?
That's when I learned the code, yeah.
And you made your own key, I guess.
Yeah, with a piece of hacksaw blade and a screw.
Yeah.
Ah.
And so you talk back and forth. So you're about 17 when you did this.
Well, how far could you transmit?
I don't know.
Huh.
Nobody cared.
Miles outside that.
Oh.
But no one else in the town had radio, so there's no interference.
So when you made that first crystal and cat whisker receiver, were you the first one in Blanding to hear radio?
Yeah. They thought we. In a couple of years, the vacuum tube, then they started the high school to build one. And they had a board about this big square and about 6 vacuum tubes on it. And it worked to a certain extent.
Well,
Now, were you picking up voice then with the vacuum tube?
Oh, you know how a vacuum tube works.
Right, but I was just wondering if with that first one they built, if there was only Morse code out on the airwaves, or they were getting voice.
When I went to Tooele, I took a 2-tube. I had, well, there's 3 tubes in it, the rectifier and an amplifier tube.
Uh-huh.
But that rectifier was 80, and the other tubes were 201, I think.
Uh-huh.
And they run on 6 volts, I believe.
Well, I just heard yesterday that a very popular guitar amplifier maker, their newest model now is a tube amplifier.
It's a tube, not...
Yes, not solid state. Because so many people said, we miss the old sound in the 50s and in the 60s. That was a real warm, a really rich sound. And so they came out with a tube model, and it's very popular. So it's making a comeback. They're making tubes again.
I've got an old tube receiver they used when we were in the weather, when we were keeping weather reports.
Uh-huh.
It's still down there.
That was, well, you went from Morse code to voice.
Yeah.
That was your voice one?
Now that.
Oh. Well, from...
Then we used that, I don't think only a couple of years, and then we went to phone. We went, as soon as we got reliable phone service, so we could dial direct to something, then we went to phone.
So at 17, so at 18, what were you doing at 18 and 19?
I worked in Sunnyside for about 3 years before I was married.
So it was you up the sunny side when you were 18, 19 years old?
Yeah.
Oh. What were you doing? Working in the mill there? Or in the...
I worked in the mine, and I worked on the tipple where they dump the cars as they come out of the mine. They dump them and weigh coal, and then it was graded. You know, then I pulled coke, and I worked as a hustler.
A hustler?
Hustler.
A hostler?
I got to drive a steam locomotive.
Oh.
No, the hostler was the man at night who cleaned out the firebox of clinkers and just cleaned it up and loaded the I don't know what they called it, where they kept their coal anyway. They shoveled their coal in
Uh-huh.
with a shovel.
Now, is this working with the railroad, or is this...
Yes, I was working for railroad.
Now, what do you mean when you said you pulled coke?
You've heard of what coke is.
It's a type of coal?
They have a big oven about 20, no, it isn't 20 feet, but it's at least 9, 10 feet in diameter, and there's a line of them one after the other, and they're all enclosed in brick. And they build a fire in there first and get them hot, and they may keep a hot fire in there for 2 or 3 days and get that just as hot as they can with wood or anything they can get in there. And then they put a slack coal in there. And that, it burns a little bit, but the air is restricted in there. So they have to pull about 4 of those before they get good coke. Then they put this in here, and it comes about and it breaks off like a pulse or something, you know.
Huh.
And it takes 24 hours for one of those, or is it 48? I don't know. For that to cure, go from slack coal to coke.
So they're just getting it real hot without burning it.
Without burning it.
And then what is that used for, the coke?
Oh, the smellers use it. It makes a terrible hot fire.
Oh, then they use it for fuel.
And no ashes.
Oh.
It makes it terrible. No, the smellers, I think, use the majority of it.
Interesting.
Well, in Sunnyside's where you met Mom, and I sent you a tape of Mom, and she tells how she met Sunday school, and she said, and Frank told me he had a radio, and he was the only one in the whole area that had a radio.
Who told you this?
Mom,
Yeah.
in her little thing. And so is this one that you built? You built your radio?
No,
Was it a shortwave? Must have been a shortwave radio. Huh?
while Mom and I was there, we had a headset, and we separated. She'd take one and I'd take the other, and we'd listen to it that way. Then eventually there was a company come in there demonstrating radios, and he set up in the hall, and that's the first radio that these people had ever heard in Sunnyside. And during the program, it faded out. They couldn't do anything about it. I think the sun went down, something, atmospheric changes, and it came from Salt Lake.
So studio in Salt Lake that was broadcasting.
At that time, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know when they started
Yeah.
broadcasting.
It's the first. So you remember the first radio broadcast that they were doing,
That,
and it was on a short wave.
no,
It wasn't short wave.
it wasn't shortwave. I think it's the same wavelength that AM is broadcast on. Huh?
Oh, I see. So it's a broadcast station.
No, it was even on a longer wavelength than that. Because the amateurs had wavelengths. They had 160 meter, then 80 meter and 20 meter on half all the way down to.
So, well, I don't know when you started building. When did you start making your own radios? You got interested in ham operating, and you got a license. Was that in Sunnyside or before?
No, after Mom and I were married and we were living in Salt Lake.
Oh, and you got your license then?
1934, I think.
And I remember you had a cake pan upside down, and you cut holes in it, and you put your tubes in it. And I remember you winding those, putting those E-shaped pieces of metal and winding the coils and your transformers.
Yeah, parts become available, but then after Mom and I was married out there in Twilla, we finally bought a TV, radio.
Oh, I think I remember it. So, you lived in Tooele for a while. Where?
You and Dorothy. Oh, we were born there.
I know I was. Well,
Bevan was born in Midvale.
in Midvale. Now, you had one, Mom lost a boy.
What?
Yeah, Mom lost a boy.
Well,
Your-
that was
your
yeah,
first
that,
one.
That was the year after we were married.
And where was this, in Twilla?
Yeah.
Oh, what about Grandma Bevan? I never did know Grandpa Bevan.
No.
Mom's dad, but I remember, I just remember vaguely Grandma Bevan.
Well, you know why we moved to Twilla.
I assumed that Grandma Bevan was ill and needed help or something. Huh?
He had prostate cancer.
That's the Grandpa did.
Prostate cancer, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he got that, they discovered that somewhere around the first of the year. Then he got, he was operated on, and he got bad, and about a month after Mom and I were married, Mom's dad sent for Dora, sent for Dora to go up and help. So we were only married about a month before she went to Twilla. Then as soon as I could get my pay or something, I moved up and got a job in
A break and a little more comfortable chair.
yeah, a big long one.
Big one.
See, how long have we been going on to now, I guess?
I don't know. We're just getting started. was. I liked it.
Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about Twilla.
Your grandpa and grandma.
I have to talk a little louder and get a little
Okay.
closer.
I remember, I would just, I must have just been about, probably born, and I was probably there until I was about 4 years old. Is that right? About 3 or 4 years you lived in Tooele.
We lived there pretty close to 5 years, I think.
Seemed like I went to school on Midvale, so we moved. I was to school in Midvale when I
I
was,
think so. So you see, we were there 5 or 6 years easily.
yeah. And I know Mom would tell me that I was born in a 2-story building upstairs in the bedroom. And I guess that building's gone now,
Oh, yeah.
a long time ago.
I'm quite sure it is. The last time there, that Mom and I were there, I don't remember seeing it. It may have been there,
Yeah.
but I don't remember seeing
Yeah.
Well, what kind of a town was Tooele back then?
it. It was a combination of farming and mining and what they call a smelter.
Hmm.
But I worked in the concentrator plant where they separated the metals from the ore through flotation. Do you know what I mean by flotation?
I've heard of it.
The ore first goes through a crusher and crushes the ore to about 2 inches or so in diameter. Then it goes into these big ball mills where there's balls in there, and they mix water with that, make a slurry in there, and that grinds it up to about halfway between sand and a pea, you might say. And then from there, it would go into another roller mill with smaller balls and grind it up to about the consistency of sand, or even break that up. It's quite a fine slurry. And then from there, it would go into a flotation trough. It had canvas sections about 4 feet square and about 10 feet long, and the slurry would run over there after having been mixed with chemicals, certain chemicals for certain ores. And there was air coming up through that canvas and make bubbles, and the ore would come up in bubbles. And then from there it would go down to the bins, and then it was put on a wheel. It was onto the canvas on a big wheel, or separated from the water, and then it would go through a dryer.
Huh.
So I run everything from the malt wheels to what they call him, a fellow who mixed the reagents, their chemicals, and kept the bins full of chemicals. Then I moved a sampler who took samples every so often. I'd have to go around and take samples of these and dry them and record where they came from. And then I went from there to the flotation operator who went around and tested the ores as it come off with a panning pan.
Uh-huh.
You separated that, how much iron was in there, so I could tell how much iron or lead or what was in there, and then it was my job to go and cut down on this chemical or this chemical and get as near a perfect product as possible out of
It sounds like you were promoted pretty fast.
it. Then I acted as foreman for a while. So, but the chemicals got out.
Really? They were pretty bad
They
chemicals?
are. So I was in bad health and I had to quit.
Really?
So is that when you moved to Midvale? You moved to Midvale from Tooele?
We moved from Tooele to Midvale, and then we lived in Lehigh a while. You know, remember Lehigh?
I don't remember Lehigh at all.
Well, I think we moved to Lehigh first, and then to Midvale.
And so when did you start music? When did you start teaching music?
In Tooele.
Oh, you started in Tooele? Is that when you met Professor
Peters.
Peterson? And so he taught you the basic...
I was playing the violin then.
Oh, that's right.
I started playing the violin when I was 10, 12, 14.
Now your dad played the violin too, didn't he?
Dad was, they didn't call him violins, they called him fiddler. He played for all the dance. He was a good musician. So this Professor Peterson came there and lived with his parents.
So how was he? Was he a young man?
Middle-aged,
Really?
but he and his wife owned a conservatory in Los Angeles.
Wow.
Or, in fact, down, what is the town just below Los Angeles?
Well, there's San Diego.
Well,
No.
Santa Ana,
Oh,
Huntington Beach,
it's in that area, Long Beach.
Long Beach, yeah.
He and his wife owned that, and they had a quarrel, and she kicked him out. So he brought about 12, 14 instruments up there to Tooele and started teaching, and he come to see me, and I traded him room and board for lessons,
what? Violin lessons? What?
music lessons.
Oh, just,
But he found out that I could play violin, not too well, but I was curious about something. I asked too many questions, and I took his teacher's course.
Oh.
So I graduated from the conservatory in California, got a certificate as a teacher of music.
Really? Because I remember stories of Dad telling me that all the different kind of jobs you would do to earn money for the family, and one of us teaching music. And
that's during the Depression.
yeah, when I was a little boy, I always pictured you with a bunch of instruments on your back, go door to door, saying, "Could I teach your kids how to play an instrument?"
But the subject that interested me most was basics of music, fundamentals of music. And by learning fundamentals of music and musical terms, how to read music, I was able to understand most instruments that's made. You know, a trumpet has keys on it.
Yes.
Do you know why?
Change the distance of the air travels.
Are they octaves?
No.
No.
Do you know what a bugle is?
A bugle?
Yes.
Yeah.
It has no keys.
That's
on
right. No keys.
It has 4 keys that you can't get between, say, A, G. You can get that note between there, or between G. Well, I'm not going to try to explain
Right,
this now.
but
When the first key on that row lengthens your tone or lowers it 1/2 tone, little tube, you've noticed
Yes,
tube
yes.
going out there?
yeah.
That conducts the sound around that small half tube, that small tube,
Uh-huh.
and lowers the tone a half. The next one lowers it a whole tone. The next one a tone and a half.
I see. And so you make the different, I mean, you hit all the notes, I mean,
You
with
have
your
to-
lips.
You have to use your lips to go that. It's 40 years since I used these terms. It's hard to remember them,
Huh.
but it's.
So a trumpet's kind of like a bugle. It just gives them a larger range.
It's a bugle with keys in. You can get the different tones between those that the bugle can't get. Yes,
Huh.
and all your instruments are based on that principle. All your brass instruments.
Yes.
Well, you taught piano. How many instruments did you teach in your career of teaching?
Well, while I was teaching, I had about 14. And they were all based because I learned the basics, and my teaching was on how to hold a violin, how to tune it, how to use the bow. The piano was mostly on fingering and so forth and so on.
I see. So then you could teach the students the basics, and then you could just say, you know, this sounds off here, it sounds a little off there, and
So on the guitar, I didn't know what the chords were, how they fingered them, but I could figure out faster than the student could because I knew what the strings were and what the chord, and what combination of chords.
right. So you just had to stay ahead of your students.